July 8, 2016. Hakata Station, one of the busiest transit hubs in Fukuoka, Japan. Thousands moving through its entrances by the hour. Commuters, tourists, vendors. No one paid attention to the black Alphard that pulled up near the Chikushi entrance. 3 men step out of a black Alphard, each carrying the suitcase. They're not nervous, they've done this before. The suitcases are heavy. Inside, gold bars, 160 kilograms. They move quickly, heading toward a nearby shop. There's no security, and there's no one watching them. Until a white van pulls up across the street. 4 men get out. Black jackets, plastic badges. They don't make a scene. Just walk up, calm voices, and say they're police. Routine check. That's all. The couriers hand the bags over, with no hesitation. And within minutes it's done. The white van pulls into traffic, and the gold disappears. No one calls the police. No reports are filed. It should have been the perfect job, but it wasn't. This is the story of how a quiet takedown outside a train station became one of Japan's most carefully planned heists, and how it slowly fell apart. This is Kazuki Noguchi, nightclub owner, ex-con, known in Nagoya for never answering the same number twice. He wasn't a gangster or a Yakuza member, but he moved like someone who had reason to keep a close eye on the door, always calm, always watching, and never stayed in the same bar long enough to be remembered. His money didn't come from one place. He had hands in nightlife, entertainment, imports. Some legal, some not. But what made him useful was control. If Kazuki gave his word, it held, even to people who didn't trust anyone. Most of the time, he operated with his younger brother, Naoki. Naoki kept quiet, ran logistics, tracked cash, made sure the clubs looked clean. Nobody knew exactly what he did, but when something needed to move, Naoki was already 2 steps into the plan. By 2016, the 2 of them had settled into a rhythm. They weren't flashy, didn't flaunt money, but their names carried weight in the right circles. When a job was high stakes and failure wasn't an option, Kazuki was the one people trusted. That trust was tested in June 2016. It began with a call. Kazuki recognized the voice immediately, Nakagaki Ryuichiro, an old partner he hadn't heard from in years. They'd pulled robberies together once. Nakagaki had done his time, kept his head down, then vanished. Now he was back. And he had something in mind. He said there was a man, someone he called K, who needed help moving gold off the record. Not physically moving it, but disappearing it. The plan was to stage a robbery, make it look real. He doesn't want weapons or violence, just enough presence to take the gold and disappear. The story was that K didn't want to pay taxes. He was trying to make the gold look stolen so he wouldn't have to report it. Kazuki started to pose questions. Who's the client? How does he know you? Why offer me half? Nakagaki couldn't name the man, said it didn't matter. What mattered was that K had already lined everything up. He'd already arranged the transport. 5 suitcases full of gold bars would be dropped outside a precious metal shop near Hakata Station in Fukuoka. Couriers would be moving them from a van into the store, without security or escort. It would all happen in less than 10 minutes. Kazuki still wasn't convinced. The payout being offered was too high. If Kate was keeping the job quiet, why would he give up half? Nakagaki told him it was about trust. The client didn't want a mess. He wanted someone who had experience, someone who could handle timing, traffic, and pressure without creating headlines. That's why he called Kazuki. Kazuki didn't say yes, but he didn't hang up either. The next day, he called his brother Naoki and laid everything out. Who called, what the offer was, how much gold was in play. They both agreed something felt off. It was too smooth. The setup was almost too perfect. Kazuki asked for more details. Nakagaki delivered. He described the vehicles involved, the make and model of the courier van, where they would park, how long they would take, what time they'd arrive. Everything he said could be verified. It wasn't guesswork. Kazuki agreed to a test run. They would go to Fukuoka. They would watch the building, time the drop, and confirm the route. If any of it looked wrong, they'd leave. But if everything was exactly how it was described, he was already thinking about how to pull it off. 3 days after the call, Kazuki was in Fukuoka. He didn't bring a crew, just Naoki. They parked near Hakata Station before sunrise and waited in the car until the area got busy. No special outfits or cover, just a clipboard and a phone, blending in like any routine logistics team. The instructions Nakagaki had given them were specific. He said the van would arrive at the Chikushi entrance of the station. The couriers would unload 5 suitcases. That they'd be heading toward a nearby precious metals shop. He even gave an exact time, 9:30 a.m. They stayed until noon. Nothing happened. The next day, they tried again. This time, a black Alphard did pull in. 3 men stepped out with cases, but one of them didn't match the description. A taller man with a tied-back ponytail. Kazuki didn't like variables. Thus, they pulled back. After that, he called Nakagaki and demanded more details. Who were these couriers? How many people were in the car? What did the client actually know about the delivery route? Nakagaki said the first 2 attempts had been dry runs. The real drop was scheduled for the following Friday. Same van, same entrance, 5 suitcases, but this time, the timing wouldn't shift. The handoff would happen. Kazuki made a decision. He was in. Over the next few days, the group assembled quietly in Nagoya. Kazuki brought in 4 more men, people who'd worked under him before. They kept the circle tight without outsiders. He laid out the plan. 2 vehicles, 1 crew member to stall the couriers, 2 to handle the bags, 1 to check the transport van, 1 to cover the exit. Every roll was locked before anyone left the room. They sourced 2 white cars, a Toyota Noah and a Suzuki Swift, both unmarked, registered under fake names. The interiors were cleared out to make space for the cases. They bought gear online, bulletproof style vests, plastic badge holders, black zip-up jackets. Not real uniforms, just enough to pass on first glance. The badges they used weren't even Japanese. They said, United States Department of Defense. Kazuki didn't care. The job didn't require a close look. They practiced the timing. Who exits first? Who speaks? Who takes the bags? Where the decoy stands? When the cars pull away? How far apart they drive? 5 minutes was the window. Not because they were rushing, because they didn't want to give anyone enough time to ask a question. By the night before the hit, they were already in position. And by then, it didn't feel like a plan anymore. It felt like it had already happened. Fukuoka, July 8, 2016. By 8:45 a.m., both cars were parked near the Chikushi entrance of Hakata Station. The Toyota Noah sat across the street, engine off. The Suzuki Swift was positioned 1 block away, near the exit route. Inside the Noah, 4 men waited. Kazuki, Naoki, and 2 others. Everyone stayed quiet. They had arrived early, just in case. Every 10 minutes, they checked their watches. At 9:28, the black Alphard pulled in. Same make, same plates. 3 men got out, each carrying the suitcase. Everything matched. The team didn't move yet. They watched the direction, watched the weight of the cases, watched to make sure no one else was following. The 3 couriers walked into the station and waited for the elevator. That was the cue. Kazuki opened the door and stepped out. The others followed in sequence. No rushing, no shouting. They crossed the sidewalk together and approached the men from the side. The lead walked directly up to them. He pulled his badge, "Police," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He told them there had been a tip-off, that the cases might contain undeclared gold, that they needed to be inspected. The couriers didn't argue. There was no backup or security. And more importantly, they weren't supposed to be carrying it either. The suitcases were handed over. One by one, they were walked back to the van, loaded in the back, secured, closed. One of the crew stayed behind with the couriers, stalled them with questions, kept the tone level. Nothing aggressive, just slow enough to give the others time. 2 more men broke off and went to the Alphard. Inside were 2 more passengers. They told them to step out, said it was a standard check. They searched the interior. Another small load of gold and a black shoulder bag left under a seat. Wallet, ID, passport, bank card. They didn't open it. They just grabbed everything. No one raised their voice. No one resisted. By 9:36 a.m., all 5 suitcases and the extra bag were in the van. The last crew member stepped away from the couriers and walked back across the street. The Knoll pulled into traffic. The Swift followed. They drove slowly, stayed in one lane, kept quiet the whole way. The couriers stayed frozen in place for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. No one had noticed anything. The team stayed on the highway until they reached Yamaguchi Prefecture. There, on the banks of a river, they stopped. They opened the suitcases, counted the bars. They tossed the uniforms, the badges, the shoulder bag, everything that wasn't gold. By early afternoon, the vans were gone. Rental cars were returned. What came next was already in motion. The gold was split into 2 batches. 60 kilograms were handed off in Shimonoseki to a separate courier. That portion would go straight to Tokyo, payment for the informant. The remaining 100 was kept by the crew. From there, Kazuki and Naoki drove west toward Hiroshima. They kept their distance from each other, switched cars once, stayed off the highways. By the time they arrived, everything from the operation was already gone. The vests, the bags, the fake badges, the shoulder bag they took from the van. All of it had been dumped near the riverbank before the split. Inside the bag was a phone, a passport, a health card, and just over 1 million yen in cash. They took the money. The rest was thrown into the water. In Tokyo, the courier met a middleman named Komatsu Zakitaro. He'd done business with Kazuki before, mainly in the nightlife scene, sometimes in resale. This time, Komatsu was in charge of the last step, breaking down the gold and moving it off the radar. Quiet, steady, and piece by piece. By the end of the month, all of it was gone. Kazuki's cut was over 100 million yen. The others got less. It was understood. He didn't change his routine. He stayed in Nagoya, went back to the clubs, paid for the same tables. Still dressed sharp, still took trips, still paid influencers to post photos with him. Nothing flashy, just consistent. There were no news reports, no police alerts, nothing that indicated the job had ever happened. The plan had worked. But there was one mistake they didn't catch. The shoulder bag they threw away contained more than just ID and a phone. It also held contact records, names, numbers, timestamps. And one of the devices had stayed on long enough to ping a tower. It wouldn't come up immediately, but it would come up. And when it did, it would lead back to every part of the job they thought had disappeared. 2 weeks went by. Nothing surfaced. No reports, no suspects, and not a trace of the gold. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. Then a story appeared in the Asahi Shimbun. It didn't mention Kazuki, didn't name any suspects, but it said that on July 8th, 3 men had been approached by what they believed were police officers outside Hakata Station and had their gold taken. The paper didn't explain where the gold came from. It only said that the police were now investigating a possible case of fraudulent impersonation. That was the first leak. The next came a week later. Police sources confirmed to local reporters that the gold had not been registered through customs. It was smuggled in, most likely from Hong Kong, then meant to be sold quietly in Japan. That made things complicated. The couriers hadn't reported the crime themselves, but they had mentioned it to someone. And eventually, that word circled back to law enforcement. Once that happened, the story couldn't stay contained. It hit the national press. Now it wasn't just a gold theft. It was an illegal smuggling operation, with organized theft on top. Inside the Nagoya office of the Metropolitan Police, a task force was quietly formed. They didn't start with suspects. They started with the scene. Surveillance footage showed the vans, the way the men moved, what they were wearing, the cars they left in. But none of the plates were traceable, and the men had avoided every camera inside the station. The plan was still holding, until one of the discarded phones was recovered. Water damaged, scratched, but not erased. That's where the first real name surfaced. One of the IDs inside the shoulder bag hadn't been faked. From there, the direction of the case flipped. It was no longer about the gold. It was about who helped move it, and who didn't stay quiet. By late August, detectives had pieced together a short list of names, not because anyone talked, but because of the links they started to uncover. The phone recovered from the bag was registered under a false identity, but it had been active weeks before the heist, placing calls to disposable numbers, most of which had since gone dark. But two of them remained active. One belonged to a man with ties to a gold-dealing outfit in Shinjuku. The other traced to an apartment in Nagoya, rented under a name police had seen before. That name led them to Naoki Noguchi. They didn't move on him immediately. They waited, built the web. They pulled traffic camera footage from the Hakata Station area, zoomed into the white Toyota No, identified the hubcaps, cross-referenced vehicle sightings across prefectures in the days that followed. Eventually, the van showed up again, outside a riverside lot in Yamaguchi. That's where they found discarded items in a dumpster nearby. Plastic badge holders, a bulletproof vest, and a waterlogged ID that had been reported missing months earlier. Still, nothing was enough to press charges, but it gave them enough to watch. Then the break came from inside. A low-level associate named Watanabe, a former runner for one of Kazuki's old side businesses, was pulled in for an unrelated matter. During questioning, he brought up the Fukuoka thing, claimed he wasn't part of it, but knew who was. Watanabe said Kazuki had pulled it off, that he'd been bragging about the payday weeks before it happened. Said the plan was to make the job look like a tax play, using fake badges to throw off the couriers. Said it had come from someone high up, but didn't know who. That was enough. On October 18, 2016, Kazuki Noguchi was arrested at his apartment in Nagoya. He went quietly, said nothing. Within 2 hours, his brother Naoki was taken into custody as well. Then the others. 7 arrests in total, all from the same crew. Inside Kazuki's apartment, they didn't find gold, but they found contact books, printed maps, and mock badge layouts, photos of gear that matched witness descriptions from the scene. The evidence wasn't perfect, but the story was forming. They were facing charges for impersonating law enforcement, theft, organized fraud, and possibly more, depending on how much could be tied to the gold itself. The trial would take time. But the collapse had already started. For years, Japan had been flooded with gold smuggled in from Hong Kong and mainland China. It wasn't moved through airports in secret compartments. It was carried, plain and direct, by couriers wearing belts lined with gold bars or packing them in cosmetics kits. The reason was simple. Japan had raised its consumption tax on gold to 8%. That meant anyone who could import gold quietly and sell it at market price inside the country could walk away with guaranteed profit. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it had been designed, just not for the government. The crew that lost the gold in Fukuoka wasn't random. They were linked to a network based in Tokyo, led by a former customs officer who knew exactly where the blind spots were. He arranged pickups in Seoul, drops in Osaka, laundering in Nagoya, and resale in the capital. The man referred to in the original plan as Key, the insider who had supposedly greenlit the fake robbery, was never officially identified. But documents from the Fukuoka District Court referenced a Kyushu-based real estate broker with ties to both local politicians and nightlife management companies. He wasn't charged. He wasn't even named. But his phone number appeared in the records pulled from the recovered device. The victims in the case, the supposed owners of the suitcases, never officially filed a criminal complaint. They testified under pressure. Their lawyers argued that the gold was not in violation of customs law. They claimed it had been bought legally in Hong Kong and was being held temporarily during a business transition. But the court didn't buy it. The chain of custody was broken, and none of the men involved in the transport could explain why they had no permits. To the public, it looked like a bold smash and grab. To the people behind the scenes, it was a business deal gone wrong, one that forced people who usually stayed quiet into the open. The trial began in early 2017 in Fukuoka District Court. The prosecution came prepared. They outlined the entire operation, start to finish. The surveillance, the fake badges, the gear, the van. The moment each suitcase was loaded, they didn't have the gold. But they had footage, witness statements, and the timing. Kazuki's defense didn't argue the mechanics. They didn't deny the cars were rented under aliases, or that the gear matched what was found in the river. They argued intent. Kazuki claimed he believed the gold belonged to his client, that the job had been presented as a civil recovery, one party reclaiming what was theirs. He said the plan was to scare the couriers, not steal from them. The court didn't accept it. The judge stated the operation had been structured with military precision, and the actions of the defendants clearly indicated premeditated theft. In April 2017, Kazuki Noguchi was sentenced to 9 years in prison. His brother, Naoki, received 8. The rest of the crew were given sentences ranging from 5 to 7 years, depending on their role. During sentencing, the judge made no mention of the man known as K. His name never appeared in the verdict. There was no investigation into who financed the gold. No inquiry into how it crossed borders. That part of the story remained untouched. When Kazuki was escorted out of the courtroom, he stayed silent. There was no appeal or any public statement. The case wrapped up with barely a sound. No cameras, no press, just a closed file and an empty evidence locker. And the 160 kilograms of gold were never found.